The Toyota Crown is back in the US. Huge news for those that were of driving age in the late 50s or big fans of JDM cars. Now that we have that out of the way, what you and I need to discuss today is hiding underneath this bodywork, Toyota has hidden two large strategic moves. Okay, so the first strategic move that Toyota's hiding here, it's not electric, it's hybrid only. We'll discuss the geopolitical ramifications towards the end of this episode. First, the bullets and numbers. The engine you are looking at is a 2.4 turbocharged engine. That should sound very familiar to you if you have seen our Lexus NX or the tech review on the new Lexus RX. And then there's going to be a 2.54 non-turbo that should also sound familiar to you because that's the Atkinson cycle that's in most of the hybrids. They haven't given me torque and horsepower figures on the 2.5. The only thing they've shared with me on that is fuel economy, because that's really what it's about. 38 mpg combined. We'll get more when we drive the car in October. However, let's get to this. This is more about performance. I know that sounds very strange for something that's really trying to be a practical vehicle, but this engine, think of it as the engine that is in the 2.4 turbo RX 500h. And what they were trying to do there was make it more of a performance hybrid. As a result, the fuel economy, it's not as good. It's 28 mpg, but why does it go down by 10 mpg? Well, it's the all-wheel drive system. Both of them, the 2.5 and the 2.4, have all-wheel drive. It is not connected with a drive shaft from the engine to the rear wheels like other Toyotas, like the Toyota Venza. It's an electronic all-wheel drive system. But that sounds like it's the same in both vehicles. Turns out it's slightly different the way it's programmed. So in the 2.5 hybrid, that one has an electric motor that drives the rear wheels, but what's going on there, it starts out as all-wheel drive, and then as the car is going, it can switch up to 100% front-wheel drive. So most of the time, you're going to be driving in front-wheel drive mode in the 2.5 non-turbo. That's either the XLE or the Limited. Then there's this Platinum, which only comes with this 2.4 turbo. They call that the Hybrid Max. It's a different term than what they use on the Lexus RX 500, but the concept is the same. Like the hybrid, it starts out as all-wheel drive, but instead of handing off to front-wheel drive in most cases, this is always all-wheel drive. So it can go up to 80% in the back and 20% in the front, or it can go all the way up to 70% in the front. And that brings us to another huge distinction between the 2.5 non-turbo and the 2.5 turbo. A transmission. In the 2.5 non-turbo, surprise of surprises, it's a CVT. We are not excited about this, but that's what Toyota hybrids have been for many years. This, on the other hand, has 6 real forward gears. Even more interesting, it's not a torque converter. This has a wet multi-plate clutch. Now, when I was speaking to the Lexus engineers at the RX 500h launch, they didn't give me those details, but in speaking to the engineers here, they kind of gave me an odd look when I said, is it the same system that's in the RX 500h? Basically, I got that like glassed over look, which means yes to me. Then we have to go to what's underneath the vehicle, and it's struts in the front, multi-link in the rear. And that brings us to another distinction between the different models. There's going to be an XLE, a Limited, and a Platinum. The XLEs and the Limiteds will have a 19-inch wheel, which I have to say is a pretty sizable wheel for a base car. Then there's this Platinum that will only be on offer with a 21-inch wheel. Moving towards the rear of the vehicle, there will be a battery underneath the rear seat. I did try to get out of that engineer what is the size of the battery. Really didn't share anything. Again, probably something we'll get in October. However, I did get out some details of a potential Eevee mode, and that's also broken out on the different models. So in the 2.5, the one that is the basic hybrid without the turbo, there will be an Eevee mode, but it's not the kind of thing where you're going to drive it for 40 miles around town. It's basically in parking lots, low speed, that's it. However, this one, the Platinum, is not going to have an Eevee mode because it doesn't have 2 electric motors. So if you look at the hybrid system, it's a typical hybrid synergy drive that we've seen for 20 years, so that can drive as EV EV only even when it accelerates. This one is an integrated starter generator motor like the RX 500h, the Tundra, or the Mercedes systems we've seen for the past like 2 or 3 years. It can't separate that electric motor from the engine. That's why this one, the Platinum, will not have an EV only mode. Inside, it is not unlike a recent era Toyota, which is to say a good thing, broken up into a couple of different silos. There's UX, there's design, and then there's tactile feel. Let's start with design. You look at this thing, it's not exactly like the Russian nesting dolls, where it's a different size from, say, like a Venza or a Camry or a RAV4. It's its own personality in here, which I have to say is a good thing, and that gets us into the UX. Here, it's got the new Toyota UX we've seen in the Lexus, the Tundra, and now this, where it's got a 0 layer. It's the map is the basic layer, and then it has different applications here on the screen. However, Toyota, very smart, to have a real volume knob, toggle switches. Other manufacturers should do this because this is safer. I keep on yelling at you guys about this. And that brings us to the TFT screen right in front of the driver, which has all the hieroglyphics for all the different hybrid modes. And speaking of modes, all of them have a normal, eco, and a sport mode. The Platinums, that adds a Sport Plus mode as well as adjustable dampers. Then that gets us to tactile feel. And here you may remember in the Venza, everything from like your hip up was pretty good. Everything from your hip down, not as good. This one, yes, it's a pre-production prototype, so you can't really gauge fit and finish by this one. However, the top of the dash all the way to the bottom of the door panels, unusually good, which tells me this is probably going to be an expensive car. We'll talk more about that later. Then there's a detail about this car. All of the Platinums come with a panoramic sunroof, but there's a hinge vise there. It doesn't open, so you would think it's just like the sunroof that's in the Venza. Not exactly. It doesn't have that adjustable opacity trick. That would be a nice thing here. And then one item we do need to discuss here, aside from some of the good with the toggle switches, it's too much black in here, my guess, especially with the coloring they're doing here. You look at the outside of this car. They're not calling it a two-tone, they're calling it a bitone. Because it's not like a Maybach where the top is one color and the bottom is another. Here, like, the hood is one color and the fenders are another. Kind of like the old Volkswagen Harley Quinn models, but here it's only on offer in the Platinum model. And then they've got this trim on the interior. They call this warm silver. That's not enough color. If I were to give some feedback here, perhaps other choices to make the color on the outside look just as special on the inside. And that brings us to another important distinction. One looks at the daylight opening of this thing and they say, is that a hatchback, meaning a 5-door, or does it have a trunk? Well, clearly it has a trunk. It's got fold-down rear seats, so a pass-through. They haven't shared any details of cargo. I really don't talk practicality anyway, so we'll have to discuss that when we drive the vehicle. Then we get to the second strategic move that Toyota is hiding underneath the bodywork of this vehicle. Is it a car or is it a crossover? And there we can answer that question with some figures. Like, you look at the wheelbase of a Toyota Highlander, 112.2 inches. You look at the wheelbase of the dearly departed Avalon, you guessed it, 112.2 inches. Now, I will give you one guess as to what the wheelbase of this vehicle is. Then we get into the length of the vehicle. It is almost identical to both a Highlander and an Avalon. Where we get some changes is the height of a vehicle. An Avalon is 4 inches shorter than this. A Highlander is 8 inches taller than this. Ground clearance, that's the same as an Avalon or a Camry, about 5.8 inches, where a Highlander is 8 inches. So clearly this is the Goldilocks. It's not trying to be a car. It's not trying to be a Highlander, a crossover, a baby buggy, whatever you want to call it. Which brings up the question, why? And here I have a theory. People are sick of baby buggies. Yes, they're practical, but no one really wants a baby buggy anymore. They buy them because they have to. For example, Kia. You know, I love me some Kia, but they've got that Carnival, and that, it is obscene to look at. It is a minivan. Minivans are the automotive equivalent to stretch pants. They say to the world, I have given up. Yet those things, not cheap, they have sold out of them for like 2 years because people are kind of over crossovers. Toyota, they have a minivan. It's a hybrid. It's like 50 grand, also sold out, which is why Toyota is saying, maybe we should give people an alternative. So really what this is, a strategic move of a form factor we really haven't seen before. Now marry that to the other strategic move that we started at the beginning of the episode, the hybrid versus EV decision. Most manufacturers have come up with these arbitrary decisions. We're going to be all EV by 2028, 2030, 2035. And that is a function of government saying, you gotta be EV or else. Toyota, they're kind of the contrarian investor. Now we've talked about this with GR Corollas. This is a different scenario. Toyota is kind of banking on the fact that more countries will be like Germany, where they recently just dropped their EV mandate by 2035 because they're realizing they can't shift the infrastructure and, more importantly, the grid to support all of those EV vehicles. So Toyota is saying, here's a mainstream vehicle that we will be able to sell for 2028, 2030, 2035, and beyond. That's why this, combined with the overall design and packaging, is two huge strategic moves forward. Which brings us to the wish list. You know me, I'm a cheapskate from New York. This thing, it ain't gonna be cheap. The car you are looking at, I'm guessing 55, 60 grand. Wow, that is a lot of money. I would rather have a Toyota Supra, a Corvette, something else like that, but then again, I am not a practical human being. My suggestion here is this, I think, is a very unique offering for people who are practical. How about the basic one, the XLE? The first number, how about we start it with a 3? I don't care if the second number's a 9, but at least a 3. But I am just one man, and this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I do want to leave you with a little bit behind the scenes. We have traveled all the way to the great state of Texas, specifically the capital, Austin. We have the Longhorns just kind of over there. And you know, back at home, Kumo and I, we're cheapskates. Our backdrop is anything you want, as long as it's a blue airplane. However, Toyota, man, do they have a budget, because they got these cool screens here. Me being the Californian, I chose the San Francisco background. However, Justin, you're on. Let's change some of the screens. Look at this. We got a cityscape. Maybe we'll call this New York City. We'll call that Pittsburgh. What's the next one? A gray wall, which works well with red. What else do we have? Another gray wall. So you see that Toyota, when you have a lot of money in the bank to make GR Corollas, you can have fancy backgrounds. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.